If we open up our index.js and scroll down to where we post to /register, we're doing three things. We're validating the registration data. Done. Did that in the last video. Second, we're going to actually register the user or save them to our database. And third, we're going to log them in. So we've done the first piece, which is validate register. Now what we want to do is create the second piece, which is actually save them to the database. So I'm going to put this on their own line here. And we are going to now put in a second one, which is user controller.register. So validate register, then we actually register. Good. Now we'll open up our user controller, scroll all the way down to the bottom, and we'll make a new method on our exports. Exports.register. We'll make it async, request, response, and next. The reason why we are passing next here is because it's going to be a middleware, right? The end of the road is not register. The end of the road is actually logging them in. And we are just sort of in the middle here of actually creating the user. So we have this request, response, and our next. Then from that, we need to go ahead and create the user. So we first need to actually import our user. We haven't yet actually imported it anywhere. So, one sec. I see a little red underline here in my ESLint. I'm not sure if you can see it. Let me bring it up here. It says, unable to resolve path module password local mongoose. So what that's telling me is that password local mongoose is not a package. And what you can tell what the actual name of the package is if you open package.json and you look here, it's passport local mongoose, not password. So let's change that to passport. And then finally, let's also open up our start.js. And remember I said that you only ever have to import your models once? Well, we've done that for store, but we haven't yet done that for our actual users. So we can just duplicate that line and change it out with user. We import our user model. So two things that we did there. We changed this to passport, not password, and we also imported our model. So let's change that down. Good. Now we need to go into our user controller and get that model that we just imported. Go to the top here, and const capital U user equals mongoose.model, and we'll ask for the user model. Why can we do that? Because we already imported it in start.js. And then we also need a library called Promisify, which I'm going to go into in just a second. So let's say const Promisify equals require, and it's a library called ES6-Promisify. Good. Now let's go down to the bottom here. And what happens when we actually hit the register? Well, that means we successfully passed this last huge validation one, and our request.body is filled with a name, an email, a password, and then also a confirmed password. So we can go and start making our actual user here. Let's say const user, lowercase u equals new, capital U user. And we just need two things here. First, we need the email address, which is stored on request.body.email. And why? Well, go to our register. You see the name of name and the name of email and the name of password. Those are what the three things that we need are going to be passed in. Request.body.name, request.body.email, request.body.password. So we have the email and we also need the name, request.body.name. Now we have that user. We haven't called .save on it just yet. And the reason is because we're not going to call .save on it. We're going to call .register against it. And because .register is the actual method that will take the password that we pass it and hash it and save it to our actual database. So, well, where did .register come from? Well, if we open up our user.js model, scroll to the bottom here, remember we did this passport local mongoose plugin? What that does is expose to us a method called .register, which is going to take care of all the lower level registration for us. You take your user model, capital U user, and you call .register, and you pass it your new user that you've created, which is our user variable here. If that confuses you, just note that this capital U user is our model, and this lowercase user is the one that we are creating right now. And then you pass it your password. So that is request.body.password. Good. Now, the third thing that you're supposed to pass register is what's called a callback. So you have a function here that takes an error in the actual user, and then we will work. Now, this is a little bit weird because we've been using async await for everything so far, but the problem with this .register library is that it doesn't return a promise. It's callback based, and this is fairly common for when you're using an external library that doesn't use promises just yet. Then you have to use either their callback, or let's just get rid of this entirely. We're going to use the Promisify library, which is going to take this older callback based function and turn it into a promise-based function so we can keep using async await. So let's show you how to do that. First thing you need to do is make the method that is promisified. So say const register equals, or like we could call it register with promise. That's just to show you that we're making a version of the register method that is promisified. So we'll just call it register for simplicity's sake. And you take promisify and you pass it two things. First, the method that you want to promisify, which is capital U user dot register. And the second thing is, because it's a method, user dot register, and not just a top level function, you need to pass it which object to bind to, which is capital U user. So if you ever are using this promisify library, if the method that you're trying to promisify lives on an object, you also need to pass the entire object so it knows where to bind itself to. So const register equals promisify. Now we have this register method, which we can await, register. We pass it our lowercase user, because that's what we're going to do. And then you also pass it the password that you wish for it to use. So it's a request.body.password. Now, what's going to happen there is it's going to take the password, it's going to take their email, and it's going to take their name. And it's not going to store the actual password. It's going to store what's called a hash in the database. Because as a general rule of thumb, or as a golden rule in the universe, you never actually store a user's password in the database, because if your database is leaked or it gets into the wrong hands, or you accidentally screenshot some of that data, or whatever happens, you do not ever want your user's password to be visible. So what happens is, let's say your password is dog123. The library is going to take that password and encrypt it into something that looks like this. Now, that, as far as you can tell, this is the password that is stored in the database. Now, when you come along 6 months later and try to log in with dog123, it's going to also hash that password into the same thing. And then the library will say, if the hash version we have on file, this is the database, and the hash version which they provided, if they are the same thing, which they are, then let them in. Tell them they are logged in. And if they're not, someone tries to log in with cat123, they'll have another hash that looks like this. I'm hitting my pause button. It's going to say this hash is not the same thing as this hash. And the beauty of that is, if your database ever gets leaked or you get hacked or whatever, then all the user will see is this piece of information, which first, they don't know the salt. They don't know how it's been hashed. So they can't really reverse it. And second, you can't reverse these at all. You would have to just make a list of very long possibilities and see if they match up. So that's the beauty of that. We are awaiting our register here. And when everything happens successfully, we just call .next, which we're going to pass to auth controller.login. We haven't done that just yet. But before we call next, let's just say response.send. It works. So give this a click on register here. Oh, I got an error. Let's open up our terminal here. Got a bit of an error. Let's see what it says. Unexpected token open on index.js on line 38. Index.js on line 38. Oh, comma dangle. Okay, there we go. Give it a save and refresh. Okay, let's try sign up now. My name is Wes. My email is wesboss@gmail.com. My password is Wes. I confirm it as Wes, and I hit register. And now it says it works. Why? Because we posted our data to register. We passed a validation. We created a user and registered. And then finally, we just say it works. Now, if we did that properly, we should be able to go to our database tooling and see that there is a new user in there. So let's check that out. I'm going to open up my MongoDB Compass beta. Going to go to my Dang That's Delicious database. And ooh, look what we have here. We got our 7 stores. We know about that. But now we have our users table, which has 1 in it. Is that going to be Wes that we just created? Well, let's go to our documents and let's take a look. Yes, here is the actual thing that we just made. Name of Wes, email of wesboss@gmail.com. And then it has a salt and a hash, which is going to allow us to sort of store the password for that user safely. And then, of course, every document in MongoDB has a unique identifier along with it. Now let's finally do the last part, which is we need to log them actually in, because they validated it, they registered themselves, And then let's just automatically log them in. I like when websites do that. After you've created an account, you can automatically log yourself in. So to do that, we're going to create a third controller called our auth controller. And our auth controller is going to handle all of the logging in, all of our passport.js stuff. It's going to handle all the password resets and email sending and all that stuff that we that is specifically related to logging in and being authenticated rather than just with the user. So go into our controllers here. We'll create a new file called authcontroller.js. Then we need to import one thing. It's called passport. Const passport equals require passport. And again, passport is the library that we're using to log everybody in. The one thing that we haven't done is the ability to send passport data and tell us if we should be logged in or not. And that's what's called a strategy in Passport. A strategy is essentially something that will interface with checking if you're allowed to be logged in. So there could be a strategy for Facebook that's going to check with Facebook if they have the correct tokens. In our case, we're going to be using what's called a local strategy. And a local strategy is going to check if our username and password has been sent in correctly. So what we'll do is we're going to create a middleware here. We'll say exports.login equals. Now, this isn't the normal request response that we're used to. What we're going to be doing is we're taking advantage of some of the middleware that comes with Passport. So we say passport.authenticate, and you first tell it which type of strategy you want. You say local, and if this, you could also do Facebook or GitHub or whatever it is. So, but we're going to be using a local, which allows us to use a username and a password. And then the second thing you pass it is a config object that will tell us a little bit of data about what to happen. So first thing is, if there is a failure, where should they go? So we'll say failure redirect. And if that is, we'll just redirect them to log in. And then we'll also say failure flash. And if there is a failure, you should flash the message failed login. So that's nice. If the passport is not authenticated, it will just redirect them and flash them. So that's nice. We don't even have to handle any of the redirects ourselves. We just tell it what to do. And then we tell it some success stuff, success redirect. If there is successfully, go to the home page. And then we also want to successfully flash them. You now logged in. We've created our login function. Now let's go and hook it up. We'll go back to our routes in index.js. We validate, register, and finally, we are going to authcontroller.login. Of course, we need to import that first. So go to the top here. We have our store controller. We have our user controller. So just duplicate that line and take out user and replace it with auth. Good. Then let's go back to our user controller. We still have this res.send. It works. We don't want to stop it from continuing down the line. So we'll take that out. Why? Because next we'll call for the next one in line, right? I know you have said this 1,000 times, but we validate, then we register, then we go to auth controller, which will allow us to log in. Good. I know this is a whole lot, but we got one more piece to do, and that's that we actually need to configure Passport in order to use local, right? Because before you use any of these strategies here, you actually need to configure them in our application. So before you use Facebook, you need to give them the correct Facebook tokens. Before you use GitHub, you need to give them your OAuth tokens. Before you use local, you need to tell it what to do with the actual users once they've signed in, right? In our case, what it's going to do is it's going to put the user object on each request. So we need to create one more file. And if we open up our handlers here, we have error handlers. We're also going to create one more file called passport.js. And this is just a handler that will configure our actual passport. So we need to import passport. We need to import Mongoose. We need our user model. Then we simply say passport.use, and we say user, capital U user.create strategy. And the reason why we can do that is because we've used that plugin in our user.js. Then we need to tell Passport what to do with the actual user. Because what's going to happen is we're going to log in to Passport, and it's going to say, okay, now what? What information would you like on each request? And in our case, we just want to pass along the actual user object, so we can do things like put their avatar in the top right-hand corner and show the stores that they've created. And we don't want to do stuff specific to that user. So we take our Passport and we say serialize user. And we take the user and we say serialize user. And passport.deserialize will do the same thing. Deserialize the user. Good. So again, what this will do is every single time you have a request, it's going to ask Passport, what should I do with the actual user now that I've confirmed that they are properly logged in? we need to take this passport.js and actually import it somewhere in our application. So we'll go to app.js. So we haven't edited app.js yet, but we'll put it up here and we'll simply just require the handlers / passport. And that will just invoke the code that lives inside of here. You probably could have also done that right in line here, but I like to have it in separate files just so that we know we are configuring everything. Good. So I know that was a lot. Let's actually go ahead and try it. We'll click on a register page here and we'll try to create user. Make sure that your MongoDB, if you refresh, if there's anything in there, make sure you delete it because you can't sign up with the same email twice. So delete. I'm going to try register. Then we'll go ahead and try it. Wes. So Gmail. Now, if this works properly, what should happen is that we are posting to register. Should validate myself. It should actually register me, and then it should log me in. So go ahead and click on register. Woohoo! It worked. Look at, you are now logged in. Good. And then it has redirected me to the homepage because I know that it has actually worked. Good. And we go back to our MongoDB and refresh. You see that that's our actual user. So in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to actually hook up this logout button. We're going to work on getting our photo to show up here and a couple of other general housekeeping stuff now that we have the concept of the user being shown.